All right. Between 10th to 21st of November 2025, stakeholders and experts on climate action converged on Belém, Brazil, for the 30th session of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, more commonly known as COP30. Delegates from more than 190 countries attended, sharing climate action ideas and innovations with the view to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius and keep them well below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, scientific evidence indicates that the impact of climate change from extreme heat to sea level rise will be far greater at 2 degrees Celsius than 1.5. It all started in Paris, by the way, in 2015, where nearly 200 countries agreed to try to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius through concrete climate actions, with powerful countries promising to support developing ones to adjust. But at COP30, different nations had competing priorities. For example, on their dependence on fossil fuels, economic position, or vulnerability to climate change. In Nigeria today, we dwell on some of the resolutions reached and action needed to make headway. I am Mina Daniels. Welcome to the program. With me to analyze the recommendations at the recently concluded COP30 in Brazil is none other but Samuel Onigbo, former member of the House of Representatives and sponsor of Nigeria's Climate Change Act, and also Southeast representative on the board of Northeast Development Commission. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the program, sir.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you for having me.
All right. Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Studies, African University of Science and Technology, Abuja, Michael Mozie is also right here. It's good to learn about your surname, by the way. Yeah, welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, gentlemen. Let's begin from COP28. Indeed, Brazil hoped to agree on steps to deliver commitment made at previous COPs on fossil fuels at COP28. In the United Arab Emirates in 2023, countries agreed for the first time to transit away from fossil fuels and energy systems. This idea had been backed by dozens of countries, including the UK, but was strongly opposed by others, including those heavily relying on fossil fuels. Well, let's talk about where it concerns us. Nigeria surely relies on it. Is this roadmap up to speed or possibly at all based on the fact that there was no consensus at COP30? Let me begin with you, Honorable.
Well, thank you very much. There was a time I had the opportunity of presenting a paper at the Scottish Parliament. That was at COP26. And we were talking about transiting to net zero and all that. And I told them there, that we're not going to transit into crisis. And by that, I meant, and I still mean, that we have to use the resources that we have, for instance, gas and all that, to really move along. And I would also like to emphasize that we were careful in structuring the Climate Change Act, because when we were putting it together, we realized the inadequacies. We have not met up with what the developed nations, what they've been able to do, taking advantage of coal and other things that are heavy emitters to develop. Consequently, we resolved that we will be looking at transiting to net zero between 2050 and 2070. That's what the law says in section 1, subsection F. So when people now talk about 2060, yes, the former late President Buhari made a pronouncement at Glasgow and said, we'll transit to net zero in 2060. Fine, he made that pronouncement before he assented to the bill to make it an act when he came back. So we have some latitude, but what we are saying in effect is that we are not going to drive ourselves into crisis. We appreciate the efforts being made, and that's why we have the Climate Change Act. but we have to, follow it in a very coordinated and systematic way to be able to achieve our goals. What's important is that we have our focus is clear, and that's why we did the energy transition plan and all that. And the focus is clear, and we are not going to transit, I repeat again, into crisis.
Oh. All right, let me come to Michael. The COP30 deal, called for a trebling of money to help the worst affected, nations adapt to the impacts of climate change by 2030. But at COP29, richer countries committed to, give developing countries about $300 billion a year by 2035 to help them tackle climate change. This whole idea of support, is that the way out? And where exactly are we on that at the moment?
So with respect to where we are by way of support and where we are as a country by way of what we have needed to scale, I think more importantly, we should be more applauded as Africans and as countries, developing countries, and what we've been able to do in the given time. It's okay for the developing countries to make the conversation about the Paris Agreement and limiting the temperature to about 1.5. But what about the Kyoto Protocol? What about the commitments that has been made in the past? How do you scale what has been your development with our development? And so when we talk about sustainable solution, like what the Honorable has clearly said, we will not be pushed into a situation of chaos. And I think it's now about, it's right about time we actually access the support. You see, the country was assented to access finance sometime last year, I think about 50 to about $150 billion, but in loan and not in structural finance. Okay, so you keep on giving, you keep on putting out loan for preparation. So what I'm trying to say is, it's about that time where we focus, because we are good for it. If you look at what we've been able to do as African countries and even as developing countries, the attention that has been paid to so soon sustainability, we have picked up on the conversation so fast. But it's right about time we look at ourselves before we look at things that are, like electric cars. It'd be good to have trains that connect the states first. Yeah. And you look at China, you look at Australia. You have Susan Mary, the Liberal Party Prime Minister, saying, yeah, we are good with sustainability, but we're going to use coal to develop our economy. You have China, you have US, you have the Texas. And yes, you can see all this thing happening. They're looking at their resources. Everything, the whole climate change, the whole conference of parties on the data. So when we talk about the damages, the loss and damage fund, we need to look inward. Unless we have a data that said 5 years ago, this is where the water was, rain came and it did this, this is the people affected, we're not going to assess much. And if we don't have that level of data sets, and which we already have, we have the meteorological agencies doing that. So I think as a country, we are doing so much more, but it's about time we stop being pushed to a pace. We start saying we have done so much. Now let's see what you have to do. You did the Kyoto Protocol. You did the Paris Agreement. Yes. What next?
What next?
So,
talking about this, Honorable, Nigeria will be at COP 28, 29, and now 30. How do you, assess our performance? Where are we as a country right now as far as climate change is concerned?
Well, thank you. It's good that, I don't know why you started with COP28, because there had been other COPs, COP21, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, and all that, and subsequent COPs, or the one we had in Marrakesh. But COP28 is a very, very important date to remember, and I'm going to tell you why. That's why I said I don't know why you picked it up. That was the COP that brought a lot of awareness to a lot of countries, but particularly Nigerians, because there were people who attended that COP that perhaps didn't have much to do with climate change, and then it generated interest and some level of awareness or some measure of curiosity. But one thing I would like to mention about our COP and what makes it significant and unique is the fact that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu exercised admirable leadership. And I'll tell you how. After he was sworn in, he had to present the annual appropriation bill, which we call budget, at the House, at the National Assembly. When he did that, if you go to paragraphs 23, 24, 25, he outlined what he would like to see our representatives achieve at COP28 before the National Assembly, before the entire nation. This is what I would like you to do. Go there, get investments, and come back. But he didn't stop there. He led the people. That's why I use the word admirable, exercise of admirable and effective leadership.
Yeah.
He led the team. And I recall that so many ministers had the rosters of meetings that they had to attend. So I would also like to mention that it was at that COP that he mooted or announced, Nigerian Carbon Market Initiative, and appointed the then Director General, Salisu, and the Chief Executive of FIRS, Zach Adedeji, as co-chairman. And to know that from then till now, we were able now to launch the Nigerian Carbon Market Framework this year is significant. In addition, he also attended other high-level meetings, and even the private sector participated in that COP, which opened their eyes to their own level of responsibility. So we have moved from that COP28, the Nigerian Climate Change Act, which was, as I said, assented to, after COP26 by late President, Buhari. We've started implementation, and from then till now, for instance, during the last council meeting, the president took charge in line with Section 5 of the Climate Change Act that positions him as the chairman of that council, and in his absence, the vice president. So you can see things that have started happening. Then you talk about the CNG, and then you talk about even him authorizing the Northeast Development Commission to deploy electric vehicles. And then we have done a lot with renewable energy. And of course, you remember that the provisions that are there in the Electricity Act 2023, which he assented to, one of the first bills he assented to after he assumed office, that has now brought access to energy off-grid, mini-grid in unserved and underserved areas. So we are moving up. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Michael, it was, however, not clear, how much will come from public versus private resources. Like I said, richer nations have consistently under-delivered on their cash promises. I think that was one of the issues that resonated with, during COP30. Yes. And this for sure are making things largely difficult for developing countries like, us. UK said it will not commit public money, but it will encourage the private sector to invest. How much can the private sector actually do to curb climate change?
Knowing the president that we have, I'm certain that he would want to use that avenue to, galvanize the economy, because clearly it's not entirely the government that, good governance, pushes the economy, but the private sector drives it. And when we talk about solutions like sustainable energy, irrigation, currently 3% of the 30% of the arable land is currently being irrigated. So it's more like that is exactly what is going to have to happen. We have specific organizations like CEFOR doing things with the NSI. That's the triple helix. It's the private sector, that's the government, and then they have the ILA, I think is International Solar Organization. And then they facilitated that huge, size of credit. That is the private engagement. And you have countries like UK telling you they're not going to put it from their budget, but they're going to have their private sector do it. So I think it's all about supporting the activities around it. And it goes a long way to say it's possible. It really is possible.
Very well.
Okay.
So now let's take a short break. The conversation will continue when we return. Just stay with us.
The implementation of the ruling is also dependent on another aspect or another arm of government.
Nowhere in the world will allow under digital economy for banks not to be dispensing domestic currency in that economy.
What will make this one different? We want to know what they do as occupation. All of these are attributes that our questions have been designed to investigate.
In a few days to come, you see that we are all around their own crannies and everywhere in Nigeria, telling people to cooperate.
Welcome to Nigeria Today.
Welcome back. We're still here discussing COP30 follow-up actions, and I still have Samuel Onibo here with me. Same with Michael Mozi. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's just talk about the fact that Brazil launched a tropical forest forever facility. I'm sure, gentlemen, you know about that. And it's a fund, you know, which hopes to raise 125 billion US dollars from loans and investments. And the aim of this fund is to prevent the loss of tropical forests by rewarding countries who keep their forests standing. Well, you and I know the position of Nigerian forests as we speak. It has become battleground. So this will definitely affect investment in that area. Don't you think so?
Well, I do. I think that it will affect investment, no doubt. However, you know, it's good to begin with a plan, make it public. You know, in management, there are some unintended outcomes. You make a beautiful plan, but in implementation, you see some unintended outcomes. In this case, that's a great idea because it's not just for Brazil alone. Studies have revealed that even the Congo Basin, which is the second largest, you know, basin after the Amazon, has been contributing a lot in trying to absorb a lot of emissions. Now that this plan has come out, even though it was not fully, you know, achieved, I have no doubt that as we go forward, we'll be able to achieve it. It's like when the climate change, Paris Agreement on climate change was adopted, it seemed impossible that we are not going to meet any target. What is it that was being discussed? I remember when we went to Paris and that was adopted, and that was my first COP. And when we came back, it's like, how were we able or going to achieve that? We can see that between then and now, we have made tremendous progress. I do not want to see it as a lost battle. I want to believe that as we go forward, we'll be able to achieve that, not just for them alone, but for some other people that have tropical forests.
Okay, Michael, a major topic on climate change is transition. How important is it, you know, for developing countries? And did the delegations also make good cases at COP30?
So everyone had to prioritize what was more important to them. And I would like to just briefly touch on the finance component you mentioned, with way of the magnanimous numbers we hear. I also don't fear numbers when I see numbers, because numbers are a product of conversations. And so also being a young lad contributing to Rotary International, I could see the numbers that are being discussed there. So no matter what is being discussed to be spent, we need to know that it's all about the data we can put out to access this fund. If it's a problem for every other economy, I mean, you see the United States, who was only represented by, I think, the governor of California, and no much of the other delegates. I mean, you could, now they're going to be using a lot of energy for AI. Yeah, so it has to come from somewhere, and there has to be a level of consciousness. With China, it will be the same thing, because China is still pushing BRICS, is still pushing gold. So.
Well, talking about US and China, you realize that at the just concluded COP30,
yes,
there was absence of many leaders, including China's president, Xi Jinping, and the US President Donald Trump. And of course, you know that China and the US are the two biggest emitters of planet-warming gases. So without them backing all of this, do you think we can make headway?
I think that's specifically what the whole world should necessarily do. You see, the rest of our developing countries, they never said we are done with this. They just didn't show up, because now the conversation is not necessarily in a top priority and all of that, but it's a conversation that matters to us. And so when we have the data and we follow through on what we've said, then we use it to serve our purpose, because this instrument, the financial instrument, is a product of documentation. So even if the US says they are not interested, don't be interested. By way of concession, the World Bank that were set up for whatever they are meant to do should be able to cater for who are meant to be catered for. And I would like to briefly touch, because the COP clearly shows us, I think it was more of a movie. Okay, so what's happening now? Like what would you do as African? What would you do as Nigeria now that China? It clearly shows us that everyone has to look for their own best solution.
Okay, that does it.
So,
but Honorable, I would really like to get your view on this. The absence of China and US, how would it affect other countries who are, relying and depending on them?
They're pushing brakes.
I'll tell you something. And that's why I've given a few examples. We have to work for ourselves, take action. And that's why I asked why you referred to COP28. But I have been coming from COP21. And I have seen the successes we have recorded. Granted that for us to get the Climate Change Act, there were failures, in the 6th, 7th, and 8th Assembly and all that. So, but we now have steps that are going.
Yeah.
Now, we're not waiting for China and US. So we know they've polluted the environment and they are hiding from being held responsible or contributing to ameliorating the situation. But the developing countries, and I'm going back to what Chukwemeka mentioned about loss and damage. When we went for COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, that was where we brought loss and damage issue to the agenda, pushed it, got it, passed it. And when we were in Azerbaijan also, it was now put into effect, just within 2 COPs. So we have the responsibility to fight for ourselves, to show rules. The past where when, it was almost like a free-for-all, that one is gone. These days, that's why negotiators are very important. Yeah. That's why teams have to get ready before they go. COP is no longer, a talk shop or a show. Some people go without knowing exactly what they're doing. But the other thing, again, referring back to what he spoke to earlier about the private sector, and this, there's a lot going on between the private sector at the bilateral and multilateral levels, that they engage and try to support nations, organizations. Even the Development Bank of Nigeria has a particular role to play now. If you want to get money from GCF and all that, they are more or less the intermediary. Okay. That is a realization that help can come from these established organizations. So we are not waiting for them.
I'm going to need your final words because time is no longer on our side.
Okay. So final words is not just about China, it's about it's about UAE Just Energy Work Program. Such bilateral sittings, they've worked with their agreement. The UAE Just Energy Program, we have to speak more informedly to it. Well, we can continue mining, but it has to be sustainable because economies keep growing from mining. So I think for climate change, for me, I see sustainable and I see climate change as a springboard for everyone to discuss solution on the same table and measure what every other person has contributed and what they need.
All right, Honorable, would you like to say a final word?
My final word is to thank the Nigerian people, for supporting actions, climate actions, because like I said, there's a lot of awareness now. And also to thank Mr. President for exercising admirable leadership.
Okay, that will be it, gentlemen. I must thank you, Samuel Onibo, former member, House of Representatives and sponsor Nigeria's Climate Change Act and Southeast representative at the Board of Northeast Development Commission. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michael Mozi, Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Studies, African University of Science and Technology, Abuja. We do appreciate your thoughts on the program tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, so you, our dear viewer, thank you so much for always being part of the program. Remember, Nigeria Today airs weekdays at 7:30 p.m. on NTA News 24. You can also watch a repeat at 10 o'clock in the night, as well as other episodes on www.youtube.com/NTA News 24 app. I am Mina Daniels. Do enjoy your weekend.